Thank you so much for joining us. Our last conversation series for this school year. For those who don't know me, my name is Michelle Monroe, and I'm the Central Coordinator for Parent and Community Engagement with the Toronto District School Board. My office is responsible in collaboration with other departments and the funding of the ministry for the conversation series. And this evening, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, who is going to open us officially and introduce our guests for this evening. So I'm now turning it over to Nancy. Nancy, take it over.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello, everyone. My name is Nancy Angevine Sands. I am a family engagement consultant and a vendor with the board that supports the work out of the Parent and Community Engagement Office. I'd like to welcome you this evening to this, as Michelle said, the last in their conversation series. It should be really interesting and informative for us. There's a few rules and some information that I need to give you before we begin. So I'm just going to share my screen. There, and I hope you can all see that. So we are very lucky to have with us this evening Larry Mikulcik, who is going to speak to us about the insidious nature of anti-Semitism, past and present. A few things that you need to know. First, we'll do the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. So a few things for you to know before we begin. We're asking you to do no recording, pictures, or screen capturing of any part of the presentation today. This is being recorded, and you will be able to access it on the PCEO YouTube channel, which is at PCEO TDSB. Please share any questions you have in the question and answer. You'll find the question and answer at the bottom of your screen if you just hover over the bottom. Don't use your chat. The chat has been enabled for you only to speak to hosts and other participants, but not to make comments or put questions in. I will be monitoring the question and answer room as we go along. And Larry has kindly said that I can interrupt him as we go along with some questions so that he can answer it when it's most relevant to you. You will see, I hope, that live transcriptions have been enabled. You just go to the transcription thing at the bottom, or you should be able to see it without that. And just checking to make sure that I'm telling you everything that you need to know. Okay. If you don't mind, while Larry is doing his presentation, if you could turn off your video, that would be great. And we can put it on at the end if we have any last questions. Just some thoughts in going through this. I would ask you to stay engaged, to experience any discomfort you may be feeling, because it's in our discomfort that we can learn. When you have the opportunity, please speak your truth, but expect and accept non-disclosure from other participants. You'll see here a good definition of an ally. It's always center the impacted in what you do and think, to listen and learn from those who live in oppression, to leverage your privilege, and to yield the floor. So a conversation is a creative tension that can shift and transform change for individuals, organizations, and communities. And that's why these conversation sessions are so important to our learning and our growing as a board, as school council members, and just as individual people. We've provided you with a platform for modeling a form of engagement that enriches public discussion on a wide range of topics, and a space for parents, caregivers, staff, and the community to come together, to talk, listen, and to share knowledge. And you may want to replicate the idea of these conversation circles in your school and in your school council as a way to share experiences and knowledge and to learn from all of the parents and caregivers and families within your community. Larry Mikulcik is a FAST national coordinator supporting teachers and human rights education across Canada. As an educator for 30 years in rural Saskatchewan, he taught high school and middle years and worked for 2 years as a curriculum coach after leaving the classroom. During his career, Larry specialized in the humanities and received awards for his pedagogy, his work with the Holocaust, human rights, and citizenship education. It's our great honor to have Larry with us tonight. Larry, thank you for joining us. I'm going to stop my share and you can take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Nancy. It's a great introduction, great start for this evening. And welcome to everybody that's joined us tonight. I'm going to also share my screen and switch to the slides that I have prepared for everybody today. Just give me a second here to open up the appropriate screens. Okay. Oh, there we are. Sorry about that. I had reduced my screen. There we go. Okay, here we are. Now I'm hoping that you will see my introductory screen. So it's great to have everybody here. And as Nancy said, I'm a retired teacher who has had experience in a few different schools. And I want to thank the Toronto District School Board and the Parent and Community Engagement Office for this opportunity to work with you tonight. The topic and impact of anti-Semitism is not only about the Jewish community, but hate and racism affects all of us and negatively impacts our communities and our great nation of Canada. I'm going to move forward. Thank you, Nancy, for the land acknowledgement. I will move past my my slide. And the same thing here, you've given a brief CV of my career and background. So I'm going to move right into an activity. Now, something that I hope everybody has their cell phones with them. Who doesn't have their cell phone with them? So I've got a little poll for you tonight. You'll be using your cell phone a few times. So to take part in my poll, I'd ask you go to your instant messaging, your text messaging, and use the code 37607. And you can probably see my cursor here. Use these numbers here as the telephone number and text in the word FASTMIC, and that'll give you access to this activity. And then from there, you'll be able to take part for the rest of the evening, unless you actually close the conversation before we're done. So that's to join. Enter 37607 is the phone number. Text FASTMIC. You should get a little screen that pops up then on your phone that indicates that you're active. Once you've joined the session, you can send a response to my question. All you have to do is send me the letter A, B, C, or D to indicate what age children you have in your home. If you have children from two categories, please enter one at a time. So instead of saying, for example, if you have a child in grade 3 and a child in grade 8, send a message with A and then send a second text message with C, and that will show up. If Nancy, if anybody has any trouble, please interrupt, and I can maybe talk you through it. But once you've joined, it's very easy to follow this. My wife and I went through it earlier today, and I've used this app a number of times. So I'm just going to make sure that it is, responses are queued, everything is cleared, and there we go. So we've got a parent or parents that have grade 4 to 6 age children. Great. And as you can see, it'll build it. Oops, that was me. I must have inadvertently. I apologize for that. This is just to kind of help give me an idea too of what age levels of parents here that I'm talking, not the parents themselves, but the children. Oh, great. We do have a cross section this evening. I can understand why we might have parents of middle school or younger children, because in high school, students and are already receiving instruction in the Holocaust, or more instruction in Holocaust and anti-Semitism and world affairs.
Larry, we have a parent who has put in the chat that she has a child in grade 10.
Oh, okay. So then she can just enter. Well, and if she
doesn't use a she doesn't use a smartphone.
Great. Oh, that's great. So I'm going to move forward, even if not everybody necessarily needs to participate. It's just an opportunity to give me some feedback, and there will be other opportunities here in a moment. Very briefly about the organization that I work for. We started in 2004 as in response to incidents of anti-Semitism that were arising in Canada at the time. It was the worst year in 20 years for anti-Semitism back at that time. Pictured there, you see Tony and Elizabeth Comper. Tony was the CEO and president of the Bank of Montreal Financial Group. His wife is a former teacher, and they're non-Jewish people. They wanted to act rather than sit back and let racism and anti-Semitism play out. So he established a coalition of non-Jewish business leaders and connected with the Ontario Institute of Studies and Education, Canadian Jewish Congress, and educators in other parts of Canada to put together a package of lessons that are free for teachers to use in their classroom. We started out with a middle years group called Choose Your Voice, a group of lessons that are free for teachers. And then 10 years later, the demand had continued to grow. We provided Voices into Action, which is for teachers of high school level students. And most of what I'm going to work with tonight is taken from the information is taken from Voices into Action. I've included other sources as well, but we have these programs for teachers. You can access them. They're all free of charge. They're all freely available online. So a brief outline for tonight. I want to look at some things like why learn about anti-Semitism. Of course, what is Judaism? What is anti-Semitism? Evolution of anti-Semitism, contemporary anti-Semitism, and how do we confront and stop or address anti-Semitism? I've provided a QR code there for you to use if Nancy says it's okay for you to use your phone to scan that. That would take you directly to our Voices into Action lesson that we have. But if not, you can just do the search on Voices into Action. And so I'm going to move forward though, and you'll still need your cell phone, so keep them in your hands. I've got a second activity. You do not need to use this code up here or send the term FASTMIC to me. You're already active. And so I've got 4 choices for you. This is a multiple choice kind of question, but you can give up to 2 responses. Why should we learn about anti-Semitism? Thank you. Got 1 response. I hope we have a few responses, but we've got 4 choices there for you. And remember, you can only enter 1 letter choice at a time, though. Just give me a few more seconds here on this. Pretty even selection so far. As I said, you can respond a couple of times. I have a limitation on my subscription. It allows me only a certain number of responses. Okay, so I'm going to move forward to the next slide. So as you can guess by the responses to the poll question, there's not one right answer, but there are many reasons to learn about anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. It is important to learn about the Holocaust because it does demonstrate the dangers of prejudice, discrimination, and dehumanization, whether it's anti-Semitism that fueled the Holocaust or other forms of racism and intolerance that we see in the world around us. It also demonstrates the need for all, especially those in leadership positions, to reinforce humanistic values that protect and preserve free and just societies. We know it was the Holocaust that prompted the human rights movement, which started after the Second World War and which directly resulted in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. I would encourage you to review the UNESCO document entitled Education About the Holocaust and Preventing Genocide. The UNESCO website has many good sources of information about human rights around our globe, not just a Holocaust or anti-Semitism education. Unfortunately, we have been very recently seen an example of why we need to learn about anti-Semitism and racism. The May 14th shooting in the Buffalo grocery store and the deaths of the 10 people do bring chills to people everywhere. And again, last weekend we had, not this past weekend, but the week before, we saw some very tragic events. And, the 18-year-old shooter that we see in this photo traveled nearly 300 kilometers to target African-American people and had reconnoitered the area the day before committing this horrific event. Now, this young man could be anyone's son, and though his actions are evil, he is not a monster, but rather he is a person who committed monstrous things. And something that I would tell my students, something I learned through my training at Yad Vashem in Israel, which is a Holocaust education center where I was fortunate enough to take a master's class in training. The Nazi murders during the Holocaust too were ordinary men who committed extraordinarily evil deeds. So the question why always arises both when we study the Holocaust and when events such as the shooting in Buffalo take place. So here I've listed a few bullet points about the Buffalo murderer. In June of last year, he threatened violence in comments made to fellow students. Now, a school official reported that this very troubled young man had made statements indicating he wanted to commit a shooting either at a graduation ceremony or sometime after. There was an investigation, a psychiatric evaluation, but he was still released in a couple of days. He had a fascination with guns, plotted the attack over several months, and he posted a 180-page manifesto online. So I will come back to this event very briefly later on in our presentation. So continuing with why learn about anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. So exactly how prevalent is anti-Semitism in Canada, and is it a concern? Now, the Government of Canada provides data through the census, not necessarily about all human rights issues, but I wanted to tap into the census for the population of Canada that professes or identifies as Jewish. And there are 326,093 people who identify as Jewish in Canada in 2016. That represents 0.9%. We could say 1% of Canada's population. So the number of incidents reported in the table on the screen in relation to the size of the population is really quite high. Now, I tried to find a number of reported incidents of racism and incidents of hate reported across Canada for comparison purposes. But unfortunately, there are so many categories under which reporting can take place. I didn't feel that any one number was accurate without the risk of specific incidents being reported in multiple categories. Now, during the past 2 years, though, using this table, we have seen an increase, not using this table, sorry, from other research I've done. I also do a presentation on anti-Asian racism during COVID. And in the past 2 years, we've seen significant increase in anti-Asian racism due in large part to COVID. So for comparison purposes, I found the 2021 data for anti-Asian racism. There were 943 anti-Asian racist incidents reported in a population of 3,163,360 total East and Southeastern Asian peoples. So quite a difference in population size and a little less than half the number of reported incidents. Now, in April, B'nai B'rith released its annual report on anti-Semitic incidents in 2021, and the numbers are quite shocking. You can see there were 2,799 recorded incidents in Canada, the fourth year in a row with over 2,000 incidents, representing a 7.2% increase over this past year. Now, I do have a couple of other graphs here to show you that the report has many graphs. The report is freely available online. Now, a breakdown by region shows that between 2020 in blue and 2021 in plum, you can see the Cross Canada report. One important data point, though, is to note that Ontario and the Atlantic part of Canada has experienced a decrease in reported incidents. So that's good news in those two regions, in your province and in Atlantic Canada. While the rest of Canada, though, saw increases in reported numbers. Now, you do note that I've been using the term reported incidents, meaning that the numbers only reflect incidents and events that an individual or an organization have taken the time to report. We know that many incidents do go unreported for various reasons, not the least of which is because people don't want to draw attention to themselves. As I said, there are several graphs in this report, but I'm just going to have these two pages of graphs, or 3 pages of graphs, I guess, if you include the very first one. I did want to point out that the in-person harassment actually did decrease overall, but vandalism and violence more than doubled as we saw in the first table. Another data point of note is that the online hate incidents across Canada have increased by 12%. So now percent is an important measure, but the actual numbers of reporting incidents is quite eye-opening. And you can see those numbers in front of you. Given the numbers presented in this report, it's important that we find ways to address anti-Semitism and the impact of hate that accompanies these incidents, because we know that this hate extends well beyond hatred of the Jews. To quote from a speech given by Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks at a European Parliament in 2016, he said, "The hate that begins with the Jews never ends with the Jews." I thought that was quite an important statement to pay attention to. Now, you may wonder, why am I including this little segment on what is Judaism? But I found during my career, I worked in rural Saskatchewan and communities that had no Jewish families. So my students didn't know people of Jewish faith or how their beliefs and practices differed from their own. And so you might be in that same situation where you kind of have a vague understanding of what it means to be Jewish. I am not Jewish myself, but we know that as humans, we often hold a fear of what we don't know, or we create our own version of the facts to fulfill or to fill the vacuum of our knowledge. And this is often based on rumors and at times even outright lies. Therefore, I would take time to help my students to understand what it means to be Jewish, either by researching, teaching it myself, or better yet, bringing in a Jewish friend of mine to help my students to understand. Now, some of you may be in that situation, as I said, so I'm going to take a couple of minutes here to just go over some very, very basic concepts of what it means to be Jewish, how they practice their faith. There's a little bit more detail on our website, but again, it's a fairly superficial look at what it means to be Jewish. So does Judaism refer to a religion or a race, or is it ethnic? But, well, it can be both simultaneously. Jews consider themselves to be a people. Judaism is a monotheistic religion which originated approximately 5,000 years ago. It started with Abraham, known as the founder of Judaism, and developed further through the next 1,000 years with Moses and King David and several other important prophets, which is documented in both the Hebrew Bible and also what we might call the Old Testament from a Christian perspective, and in the Islamic scriptures. So on the screen in front of you are the four core beliefs rather, where Jewish people worship one God who has made a special covenant with the people. They also believe that the Messiah has not yet come, and the Jews are still praying for the Messiah. Worship takes place in a synagogue with a rabbi as the leader on either Friday evening or Saturday morning, which was the 7th day of the week. And a person is considered to be Jewish if his or her mother is Jewish. The key texts with their faith teaching and laws come from, or are the Torah, which is what we would say are the 5 books of the Christian Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And the Talmud, which is a collection of teachings and commentaries on Jewish law. It was created later by scholars and rabbis. Moving forward, Jewish holidays include many annual big holidays determined by the Torah, as well as small holidays that were initiated by rabbis and which are generally tied to historical events. Here are just a very few of the key or annual big holidays that we may have heard of. We're familiar with Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. There are 3 pilgrimage festivals that are important holidays like the Passover, which is around the time of Easter for Christians, and Hanukkah, which we see celebrated around the early part of December, lasting for 8 days, commemorating the miracle of oil in the temple. Being kosher, we're all familiar with the term being kosher or the term kosher, but do we as non-Jews really know what that means? It is an important part of life for practicing Jews. I've very briefly defined it here. There are strict rules about what you eat, separating meat, dairy, and pariv, which is neither meat nor dairy. There are rules on how to slaughter animals and prepare the meat. And there are certain foods that are forbidden, pork and all products from pigs and shellfish, because they are bottom feeding creatures. So I'm going to move forward, so I know our time is limited. So what is anti-Semitism? On the surface, it may seem easy to define, but in reality, defining a specific definition that can be used in every situation is not as easy as it sounds. So Canada has accepted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, but not all academics feel that the IRA definition deals with criticism of Israel or Zionism clearly enough. So we will use definitions today that will give us a starting place in understanding what anti-Semitism is. I'll be using the IRA definition, the Jerusalem Declaration, and the Nexus definitions to explain what anti-Semitism is and isn't. But I would encourage you, for more complex and complete understanding, I would recommend that you find the explanations and clarifications for these definitions on their website. There is a website for each one of these. So according to IRA, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Okay, so that's the IRA definition. Nexus is a little bit different. Consists of anti-Jewish attitudes, actions, or systematic conditions. It includes negative beliefs and feelings about Jews, hostile behavior directed against Jews, and conditions that discriminate against Jews and impede their ability to participate as equals in political, religious, cultural, economic, or social life. And finally, the Jerusalem Declaration. Anti-Semitism is discrimination, prejudice, hostility, or violence against Jews as Jews, or Jewish institutions as Jewish. Okay, briefly, anti-Semitism then can be seen as the following. One, claiming that all Jews are part of, so these are all examples and types of anti-Semitism, just to be clear. So claiming that Jews are all part of a sinister conspiracy to control the world's media, economy, governments, or other financial, cultural, or societal institutions is anti-Semitism. Blaming suffering and injustices around the world on Jewish conspiracies is anti-Semitism. Claiming that Jews are responsible for world plagues is anti-Semitism. Claiming that the Jews are responsible for the death of Christ is anti-Semitism. Denying the scale, the fact, the intentionality of the mechanisms, such as the gas chambers of the Holocaust, is anti-Semitism. Targeting Jewish synagogues, cemeteries, memorials, schools, and homes with graffiti that uses Nazi symbolism or slogans of hate is anti-Semitism. And denying Jewish people opportunities for services based on the fact that they are Jewish is anti-Semitism. Now, anti-Semitism is not the criticism of Israel for political actions. So the greatest amount of discussion and debate about defining anti-Semitism surrounds the views of Israel and Israel's policies and actions. Now, we've seen politicians, as you see on the screen, UK's former Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, or the 4 US Congresswomen known as the Squad, pictured here. They face criticism for the use of anti-Semitic tropes that reflect prejudice or racist stereotypes. Now, these politicians have often walked a fine line in that criticism of Israel that goes from legitimate criticism of policies to using half-truths to advance their own propaganda, claiming Israel is engaging in ethnic cleansing, and at times getting into trouble by calling for the destruction of Israel and the creation of Palestine. So we have to take a moment to clearly consider how we critique Israel as a part of understanding anti-Semitism. So once again, to be clear, anti-Semitism is not the criticism of Israel for political or military actions or decisions. It is perfectly permissible to criticize countries and governments about their actions, and that is no different for Israel. But what is anti-Semitic is to promote the killing of Jews or the annihilation of the state of Israel simply because they are Jewish. Now, on our Voices into Action website, we host a 19-minute speech given by Rabbi Sachs to the European Parliament entitled "The Mutating Virus, Understanding Anti-Semitism." So what I want to show you next is a 5-minute animation that summarizes this speech, and it's narrated by Rabbi Sachs himself. So it should start on its own here, I believe.
Within living memory of the Holocaust, after which the world said it would never happen again, anti-Semitism has returned. But what is anti-Semitism, and why should its return be cause for grave concern, not only for Jews, but for all of us? Historically, anti-Semitism has been hard to define because it expresses itself in such contradictory ways. Before the Holocaust, Jews were hated because they were poor and because they were rich, because they were communists and because they were capitalists, because they kept to themselves and because they infiltrated everywhere, because they clung to ancient religious beliefs, and because they were rootless cosmopolitans who believed nothing. So what is anti-Semitism? Let's be clear, not liking people because they're different isn't anti-Semitism, it's xenophobia. Criticizing Israel isn't anti-Semitism, it's part of the democratic process, and Israel is a democracy. Anti-Semitism is something much more dangerous. It means persecuting Jews and denying them the right to exist collectively as Jews with the same rights as everyone else. It's a prejudice that, like a virus, has survived over time by mutating. So in the Middle Ages, Jews were persecuted because of their religion. In the 19th and 20th centuries, they were reviled because of their race. Today, Jews are attacked because of the existence of their nation state, Israel. Denying Israel's right to exist is the new anti-Semitism. And just as anti-Semitism has mutated, so has its legitimation. Each time, as the persecution descended into barbarity, the persecutors reached for the highest form of justification available. In the Middle Ages, it was religion. In post-Enlightenment Europe, it was science, the so-called scientific study of race. Today, it's human rights. Whenever you hear human rights invoked to deny Israel's right to exist, you are hearing the new anti-Semitism. So why has it returned? There are many reasons, but one root cause is the cognitive failure called scapegoating. When bad things happen to a group, its members can ask one of two questions. What did we do wrong? Or who did this to us? The entire fate of the group will depend on which it chooses. If it asks, what did we do wrong? It has begun the process of healing the harm. But if instead it asks, who did this to us? It's defined itself as a victim. It will then seek a scapegoat to blame for all its problems. Classically, this has been the Jews, because for 1,000 years, they were the most conspicuous non-Christian minority in Europe, and today, because Israel is the most conspicuous non-Muslim country in the Middle East. The argument is always the same. We are innocent, therefore they are guilty. Therefore, if we are to be free, they, the Jews or the state of Israel, must be destroyed. That is how the great evils begin. Why then should we all care about this? After all, if we're not Jewish, what has it got to do with us? The answer is that anti-Semitism is about the inability of a group to make space for difference. And because we're all different, the hate that begins with Jews never ends with Jews. It wasn't Jews alone who suffered under Hitler. It wasn't Jews alone who suffered under Stalin. It isn't Jews alone who suffer under the radical Islamists and others who deny Israel's right to exist. Anti-Semitism is the world's most reliable early warning sign of a major threat to freedom, humanity, and the dignity of difference. It matters to all of us, which is why we must fight it together.
Okay, so as I said, that's a summary, very effective summary of a 19-minute speech that Rabbi Sachs gave to the European Parliament, in which you can watch on our website or look at the transcript of it. So he identified four main types of anti-Semitism, which also represent the timeline and evolution of anti-Semitism. So there are these four distinct types and stages of anti-Semitism. There's also the undercurrent of hatred, where the Jews have been blamed or targeted in ways that do not specifically fall into these four categories. So in religious anti-Semitism, Jews are seen as the killers of Christ. As well, Jewish beliefs are intentionally exaggerated and misrepresented as a form of religious anti-Semitism. Economic anti-Semitism is a contradictory form in that Jews are portrayed as greedy capitalists on one hand, while at the same time are accused of promoting communist conspiracies for world domination. Racial anti-Semitism maintains that Jews are not like everyone else, but rather they are genetically inferior, immoral, and unclean. Finally, political anti-Semitism accuses Jews of world domination and genocide, and which says that Jews in Israel have no right to exist. So since 1945, we also see many anti-Semitic groups deny or distort the facts of the Holocaust. So let's take a closer look at these four forms. So in the past, some Christians have had an issue with Jews because they believe Jews murdered Jesus Christ, and also because Jews refused to accept Christianity unless they were forced to. And then these converts were viewed with suspicion if they did convert. Similarly, many Muslims in the past and many extremists currently are anti-Semitic because Jews do not accept Islam. It is in the theology of early Christians that we find the clearest foundations of anti-Semitism. Sometime around 140 AD, the Christian apologist Justin Martyr was teaching in Rome. Now, vilifying Jews was a central part of Justin's rhetorical strategy. He alleged that they were guilty of persecuting Christians and had done so ever since they had killed the Christ, quote unquote. It was an ugly charge, soon leveled again in the works of another Christian father, Tertullian, in 160 to 225 BC, who referred to the synagogue of the Jews as fountains of persecution. Now, to demonstrate this peculiar malevolence, Tertullian portrayed Jews as denying the prophets, rejecting Jesus, persecuting Christians, and as rebels against God. So these stereotypes shaped Christian attitudes towards Jews from the late antiquity into the medieval period, leaving Jewish communities vulnerable to periodic outbreaks of persecution. And these ranged from massacres, such as in York in 1190, to ethnic cleansing, as seen in the expulsions from England in 1290, from France in 1306, and Spain in 1492. Later in the 1500s, Christian reformer Martin Luther wrote an article entitled "On the Jews and Their Lies," where he was angry that Jews still would not convert to Christianity despite the changes that he and others brought to Christianity. Now, Luther went as far as to suggest synagogues should be burned, Jewish homes should be destroyed, and he accused the Jews of idolatry, lies, cursing, and blasphemy. Luther's writings about Jews have been completely disavowed and renounced by the Lutheran churches in North America and in Europe, just to be clear. Now here on this screen in front of you are images that represent some types of religious anti-Semitism. We see on the left, Jews nailing Jesus Christ to the cross of crucifixion, even though we know it was Roman soldiers, not Jews. In these second and third images, we see medieval examples of the so-called blood libel. The blood libel in Europe is a false allegation that Jews murder Christian children so that the Jews can use their blood to make matzah, which is a crisp, flat, unleavened bread that is eaten on Passover Eve, which anybody who knows anything about Jewish belief, it is not permissible for Jews to eat or consume blood. It's not even really appropriate to touch blood. Here you can see another image depicting the blood libel, and which was published in the Nazi Der Stürmer newspaper, which was published weekly by Julius Streicher. Der Stürmer was a Nazi propaganda publication which was viciously anti-Semitic during the Nazi era. Okay, so I hope you have your phones with you again. Once again, I want to give you the opportunity to participate using your cell phone. So I've reproduced this image again here for you, and I'd like you to submit some answers to the question: what tropes or images or parts of the image or symbols do you see in the drawing that are part of the promotion of anti-Semitism, or that we would identify as anti-Semitism? So you can, look at the details of the picture. You can answer in a phrase or 1 to 3 words if possible, because keeping it short, we can see more on the screen at the time. And as before, you don't have to re-enter the numbers 37607 or anything like that. You can just go ahead and submit your answers. So as you look at this picture, anything that you see, and if somebody's already submitted it, I don't mind seeing it a second time. It means you've observed it. So it's an example of the blood libel. Thank you. As you look further at the details of the picture, are there other things that you see that, yeah, you see the Star of David in the handle. Very good. So a lot of people miss that one. So again, it's making that connection. The big noses, the hooked noses, collecting blood from children. Thank you. The cross is okay. So what do you notice about the cross? What is that saying? Yes, Christ and Christ killers. So they've made that connection. Anything else that you see there? Jewish swords above the Christian graves. Yeah, very good. And again, there's room for interpretation on that. It's very much, it could be that. It could be that those are the 3 crosses from Calvary and the killing of Christ, preying on innocent children. And if you look carefully at the children, what do you notice about the specifics of the children? And then there's 2 other little things that you might note. And I thank you for taking part. I really, exactly. Thank you. The children are Aryan looking. And particularly with this was a Nazi, used in a Nazi newspaper. Of course, the children would have, all the hallmarks of the quintessential Aryan child. There's one or two other little things you might notice. My wife disagreed with me on one, but maybe I'll just move forward here with my cursor. Oh, business suit, very good. Yes, that idea of capitalism. If you look where my cursor is here, we see somebody can type it in and submit it. My cursor is circling it. The snake or the serpent, and I use the idea of the term serpent on purpose. Serpent like Satan. Thank you. Well, cool. That's very good. Thank you. And then the other thing that my wife disagreed with me on, well, not fully disagreed, but wasn't so sure. I was looking here at the hand. Destruction of Eden. Awesome. Great. Well, not awesome in the message, but awesome that you picked that out. Here, the hands are almost like long nails, almost demonic in a sense, or evil. You watch movies and then you see long nails. The fingernails kind of have that evil, give us that concept of evil. So I'm going to move forward. Thank you for those responses. Animalistic, yes. So I'm going to move forward. Thank you for those responses, by the way. As a teacher, I get excited when my students respond or when people respond. When the Black Death struck in Europe, It killed between 30 and 70% of the population, depending what country or region you were in. But what could account for such a catastrophe? Of course, back in those, we know today, but those people at that time didn't really know. Quickly, communities started to blame Jews for the plague. Pogroms occurred all over Switzerland, northern France, the Low Countries, Germany. Typically, the authorities in a location would be alerted to the danger by a letter sent from another town. Now, in typical cases, the city council then ordered the burning of entire Jewish communities. In 320 towns that had Jewish settlements during the 14th century, nearly 3/4 saw pogroms. 88 towns did not. Now, many of these locations, with many annihilating their Jewish communities and others leaving them untouched, are only a few kilometers apart. Now, in one case, we know more about what tipped the balance. In Strasbourg, the city council originally refused to give credence to letters that were received from the neighboring town, warning them of the danger of Jews poisoning the wells. Now, a mob led by the Tanners Guild then deposed the Strasbourg ruling council. Its successor's first act in office was to order the burning of Strasbourg's Jews, over 2,000 of them on St. Valentine's Day. Here it is clear what made the crucial difference: the willingness of a violent mob to effectively overthrow the established authorities in order to attack the Jewish minority. From 1478 to 1837, the Catholic Church in Spain sought to root out and punish heretics, that is, non-Catholics, especially Jews and Muslims who were subjected to persecution and then torture. So this illustration here depicts the key elements of an auto de fe, or public sentencing, during the Spanish Inquisition in the Plaza Mayor of Madrid in 1680. Now, anti-Semitism also has an economic branch that has at its core the accusation that Jews are especially greedy for money and power. Some of these beliefs go as far back as to Judas, who accepted 30 pieces of silver to betray Jesus prior to to Christ's execution. Now, Judas returned the money and hanged himself over the guilt of his betrayal. But one of the roots of economic anti-Semitism goes back to Judas. In our previous slides, we saw that Jews were accused of many wrongdoings of a religious nature, and here we see examples of anti-Semitism that accuse Jews of greed through money lending. Now, rulers in the early Middle Ages of Europe had placed restrictions on Jews, barring them from holding certain jobs and from owning land, leaving them little means of making a living. At the same time, since the early Christian church did not permit usury, meaning lending money for interest, Jews took up that important but very unpopular role of money lending to the Christian majority. Now, money lending is key to the Shakespearean play Merchant of Venice, written in about 1596, and which can be seen as anti-Semitic today, but there are many critics who debate that. In the center of the slide is a photo of the 1807 children's dice game called The New and Fashionable Game of the Jew, which came with an illustration of an old man in a turban, which was a stereotypical Jewish banker in fine robes hoarding his money, prepared to rip off all those good Christian boys and girls with his tricky ways. Now, Stephen Sondheim, the Jewish-American composer, owns a copy, and he describes it as a game that taught kids to be anti-Semitic. Also in the picture are photos of the cover of a book first published in Russia in 1905, and which is pure fiction. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion allegedly documents the minutes from meetings of Jewish leaders. Now, the Protocols describes the fictional secret plans of Jews to rule the world by manipulating the economy, controlling the media, and fostering religious conflict. Now, following the Russian Revolution, for which the Jews were also blamed, by the way, anti-Bolshevik emigres brought the Protocols to the West, and it was translated into other European languages and even into Arabic. Now, in 1920, Henry Ford, who was rabidly anti-Semitic, published parts of the book in his newspaper. Now, in 1921, though, the London Times presented conclusive proof that much of the Protocols was clumsily plagiarized from a French political satire that never even mentioned Jews. It came from Maurice Joly's 1864 work entitled Dialogue in Hell Between Machiavelli and Montesquieu. But even though the Protocols have been discredited, it is still widely circulated by extremists and anti-Semites, mainly through the internet, to spread misinformation, create mistrust, and ultimately hatred of Jews. Here we see an anti-Semitic cartoon from Judge magazine in 1892. On the right, Jews stream into New York City, turning it into New Jerusalem, as you can see by the sign at the bottom. You can see that the Jews on the right are being driven out of Russia by Tsar Alexander III. All the businesses now bear signs suggesting that they are owned by Jews, while to the left, Americans who originally settled the city head to the west. And the quote, "Our first families driven out," the cartoon reads. And we all know the first families were actually our First Nations. Here's a 1904 illustration. We've got US President Roosevelt telling Russian Tsar Nicholas II, "Stop your cruel oppression of the Jews." This is one instance of a Western power standing up for the Jews, and which illustrates the burden of anti-Semitism that Jews must carry. In the late 1800s, because of progress in scientific knowledge, especially about human biology, psychology, genetics, and evolution, some intellectuals and politicians developed a racist perception of Jews. Now, this perception developed within a broader racist view of the world based on the notions of inequality of races and the alleged superiority of the white race over other races. Now, this new form of anti-Semitism promoted the belief that Jews could not change their behaviors, saying they lie, are greedy for power and money, and hate of other religions. Now, the new anti-Semites believed Jews passed on innate racial qualities inherited since the beginning of time. So-called experts drew upon the pseudoscience of racial eugenics, which believed human beings would improve through genetics and heredity or planned breeding. They argued that the opposite would also hold true, and that racial intermixing with Jews would pollute so-called pure blood, Aryan or otherwise. Now, of course, Adolf Hitler was influenced by both the traditional and racist anti-Semitism that he was exposed to in Austria and Germany, and which is embedded in his political writings and speeches. Now, the Nazis defined Jews as a race, regarding the Jewish religion as irrelevant. The Nazis attributed a wide variety of negative stereotypes about Jews and Jewish behavior to an unchanging, biologically determined heritage that drove the quote-unquote Jewish race. Like other ethnic groups, to struggle or to survive by expansion at the expense of other races. Now, the Nazis believed that superior races had not just the right, but the obligation to subdue and even exterminate inferior ones. They believed that this struggle of races was consistent with the law of nature. Maintaining race purity was important, according to Hitler and others, because mixing with other races would over time lead to degeneration of a race to the point where it lost its distinguishing characteristics and, in effect, lost the capacity to effectively defend itself, thus becoming doomed to extinction. So Hitler believed that Germans were members of a superior group of races that he called Aryan, and which were gifted above all over other races, and he asserted with this biological superiority, destining the Germans to rule a vast empire across Eastern Europe. So in the photo to the left is a photo of a Nazi chart developed to explain their 1935 Nuremberg race laws to the citizens. The law defined a citizen as a person who is of German or related blood. This meant that Jews, defined as a separate race, could not be full citizens of Germany. They had no political rights, and the chart shows how to determine a person's racial identity by proving their grandparents' racial identities. The chart demonstrates who could be classified as a German, a Jew, or Mischlinge, which is a mixed race person, and who would be considered neither German or Jewish. Now, the chart on the right is from a 1938 German illustration from Alfred Vogel's textbook, Inheritance and Racial Hygiene, and which was meant to compare German traits with the Jewish traits that were considered markers of inferiority. So anti-Semitism has not disappeared. It merely changes form. As Rabbi Sachs says, it mutates. We have seen how it originated as a form of religious intolerance. With the Enlightenment in Europe, it found expression as racial intolerance. Nowadays, the so-called new anti-Semitism uses criticism of Israel, often described as a Jewish state, as a blunt hammer used to beat Israelis and Jews. Double standards are applied by requiring of Israel standards not expected, or demanded of other nations. And as our former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney once said, Israel is the collective Jew, and as such, every Jew is blamed for Israel's actions. So the 5 bullet points on this slide are the 5 beliefs and accusations of contemporary anti-Semitic groups. These anti-Semitic beliefs are held by both extreme right-wing and left-wing groups. We often think that it's only right-wing, but there is a lot of anti-Semitism in the left-wing as well. We are seeing an increasing degree of anti-Semitism in modern left-wing movements, and these groups are willing to promote just as much violence against Jews as extreme right-wing groups do. Now, one important distinction to be made, however, is something that I illustrated earlier, and that it is perfectly permissible to be critical of the actions and decisions of the government of Israel, just as we do here with our Canadian government. What is considered to be anti-Semitic is saying that Israel and Jews have no right to exist, or that they should be destroyed and exterminated. Now, according to Timothy Snyder, who's the author of a book entitled Bloodlands and the book on tyranny, he says that the Polish communists were the first to equate the Israeli armed forces to the Wehrmacht of Nazi Germany as early as the 1950s. This form of anti-Semitism caught on in the USSR and is still used today to demonize Jews. These cartoons cross the line from legitimate political satire to showing Jews as being bloodthirsty and delighting in harming the innocent, making them the modern Nazis. The photo on the left is taken from 1972 in the USSR and is of a float in a May Day parade. In the USSR, the government claimed to have rejected anti-Semitism and called such displays anti-Zionism. But given the imagery, there are plenty of the core tropes that we continue to see today, all of which are anti-Semitic in nature and had been borrowed from the first half of the 20th century. So this form of anti-Semitism was deported by the USSR and still forms the core tropes in the contemporary anti-Zionist left today, with the sole intent of demonizing Jews and Israel. Now, we know right-wing nationalist parties have been growing in Europe and have been gaining strength for years. With this growth, we see right-wing governments that want to close their borders to immigration, apart from accepting large numbers of Ukrainian refugees fleeing the war in Ukraine. These governments tend towards greater racism, going so far as to spread rumors about Muslims, Jews, and those from other countries. They tend to promote their own histories to the point of exaggeration and to the point of building monuments of citizens who fought with the Nazi armies against the communist Russians. Now, governments like that of Poland have even passed laws that make it illegal to say that any Polish citizens may have collaborated with the Nazis during the Holocaust, during the Second World War. In Lithuania, for example, Jonas Noreika is considered a hero for fighting the communists, and has many streets and even a school named after him. But his very own granddaughter, Sylvia Foti, has conducted significant research and has found that Noreika was complicit in the annihilation of over 2,000 Jews in 1941. Similar denial of involvement in the Holocaust or any human rights violations during the Second World War is common in many of these far-right parties. Now, many of these governments are very nationalistic and are glorifying the history of their people to the point that they outright deny some of the more unsavory elements of their past, including denying that any of their citizens were involved in the Holocaust, while at the same time ignoring the current growth of anti-Semitism in their countries, and in some cases, even going so far as to uphold some of the old anti-Semitic tropes that we thought were reconciled to the past. Growing forms of modern anti-Semitism are that of Holocaust denial and distortion. Now, according to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Holocaust denial is any attempt to negate the established facts of the Nazi genocide of European Jews. Holocaust denial and distortion are forms of anti-Semitism, prejudice against or hatred of Jews. Holocaust denial and distortion generally claim that the Holocaust was invented or exaggerated by the Jews as part of a plot to advance Jewish interests and to increase their wealth. Now, on this frame you see, or in this picture, you see on the left, a book that's been around for a few years now, Did 6 million really die? And you notice in the top left photo of the photo, the truth at last. So this author has, saying we finally arrived at the truth about the Holocaust. In the bottom center, we see a large event, a protest. I'm going to guess it's in a Muslim country, or Arabic country rather, because of the writing. But we see a big poster there that says Holocaust is a big lie. You see a golden calf, which Europe and the United States are bowing down, worshiping, and it's bleating out Holocaust. And behind that golden calf is, a caricature of a Jewish person. On the bottom right, we see an older picture of a Ku Klux Klan gathering, claiming the Holocaust is a gigantic Zionist host. There were no Jews killed at the Holocaust. And then the cartoon in the center comes from a cartoon contest that I'm going to explain a bit about in the next frame. But you've got a Russian soldier or East German soldier. If you notice the date here on the calendar, it's December 1947. That's after the Second World War is over, but the camp at Auschwitz was used by the Soviets as a prison camp where they continued to house Germans after the Jews were liberated. And the soldier says, "Hey, Santa, why didn't you ever come here to Auschwitz during the war?" "Couldn't find the chimney," Santa says. So again, implying that there were no chimneys for cremation at Auschwitz. A very distasteful cartoon. So anti-Semitism is not only promoted by extreme left and right groups or by neo-Nazis, but in some cases by religious extremists. And that is the case with Iran, where state-sponsored anti-Semitism is the policy of the country. And it's required to adhere to anti-Semitic beliefs. We see this reflected in the Iranian Holocaust cartoon contest that was roundly condemned by countries and organizations around the world, but which was held for at least 2 years. Now here, these two cartoons up at the top, use my cursor, are not from that contest. These are Western cartoons. And of course, you may recognize the caricature of Ahmadinejad. He says, "I retire from Iran's presidency in August and plan to spend more time denying the Holocaust with my family." And then here we've got a cartoon of Ahmadinejad also, speaking of the evils of Jews and, ultimately here promoting the nuclear destruction of Israel. And then down here on the right is a cartoon from those contests where you see, a demonic looking Jewish person here who calls a Holocaust. And of course, when he calls that out, it's considered a lie. So his nose grows like Pinocchio's, and in so doing impales world peace. Okay, hope you have your phones ready. I'm going to ask you to assess another cartoon. This one's from one of those contests. So looking at the cartoon from one of the Iranian competitions, again, what symbols, images, or tropes do you see that are intended to be anti-Semitic in this cartoon? So, look at the details there and once again, submit your responses. What you see there that we would consider to be anti-Semitic. I know it takes a few seconds for you to, enter there we go, money. Yes. That whole idea of control of money, or the Jews are money hungry. Yes. You've got the well-known gate. The key is the Star of David. Good attention to detail. Yes. 6 million on the cash register. As the numbers go up, 6 million for Jews not killed. Yeah, could be. And that does get most of what you can see, and even the detail here to showing, the till is full of cash. Absolutely, making money off of that. Oh, it does. It does so. You cannot conflate anti-Semitism with people criticizing Israel in this presentation. Very dangerous. Show of business. Yes, that's hard to see. And up over here, Holocaust show and written. Okay, here are only 4 of many Holocaust deniers and distortionists that we see from around the world. David Irving, of course, is one of the most well-known of these because of his civil case brought against him by Dr. Lipstadt for Holocaust denial. Now, he lost his case, and the events are dramatized in the well-known movie Denial. We see former Bishop Richard Williamson declared in a video recorded interview that he didn't believe that Jews were killed in gas chambers during the Second World War, and for which he was sanctioned by the Roman Catholic Church. Third person here is Farrison, who was British born, but was a French academic denier who spent his life writing his beliefs and for which he was prosecuted several times in France. Thomas Dalton is a mercurial character, this last one here, who is hard to find in any biographic information on, though he still publishes books that both demonize Jews and deny the Holocaust. So the CEO of our organization, Dr. Chatterley, is an academic who says that no one seems to know who Dalton really is. And the academic community seems to think Dalton may be a pseudonym for a group of Holocaust deniers and writers. Of course, that doesn't mean that we don't have some in Canada. James Sears is the Canadian editor, or was the Canadian editor for Your Ward News in Toronto. And in 2019, he was given a 1-year prison sentence for promoting hatred against Jews and against women. The publication promoted Holocaust denial and anti-Semitic blood libel claims, and he published columns justifying sexual assault. Now, it also contained racist, Islamophobic, and homophobic messages. James Sears was rearrested and put back into jail in February of 2022 for breaking the conditions of his parole by engaging in hate speech about Dr. Theresa Tam. Now, another well-known Holocaust denier, Ernst Zundel, operated a Nazi propaganda publishing house from Canada and wrote for a website that espoused anti-Jewish sentiments and questioned whether 6 million Jews had died in the Holocaust. Zundel was deported from Canada to Germany, where he was promptly arrested, charged, and found guilty of 14 counts of incitement of racial hatred. Now, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison in 1988. Now, Monica Schaefer of Jasper, Alberta, was in Germany visiting family when she was arrested in January of 2018 on charge of incitement of the people. The former Canadian Green Party candidate was convicted in 2018 of inciting hatred by publishing videos that denied the Holocaust. In 2016, Schaefer called the Holocaust the most pernicious and persistent lie in all of history, described concentration camps as work camps that did not have gas chambers. And finally, James Keegstra made international headlines in 1983 when he was accused of teaching students that the history of the Holocaust was fraudulent and that a Jewish conspiracy was responsible for many of the world's problems. He had been teaching for 14 years in Eckville, Alberta, and he was charged with willfully promoting hatred against an identifiable group under the Criminal Code of Canada. Now, he was found guilty, was fined $5,000, and after appealing all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, Keegstra received a 1-year suspended sentence, 1 year of probation, and a community service in addition to the fine. So in Canada, there's been Holocaust denial found in many Arab language publications as well, such as community publications distributed in grocery stores and coffee shops, which is a new and frightening trend. A newspaper in Windsor, Ontario area encouraged terrorism against Israelis, calling it a sacred duty of jihad. In London, Ontario, another Arabic newspaper printed an article claiming Nazi slaughter of Jews was justified. Now, I just want to make the point that these are extremist views. These are not the mainstream of Muslim Canadians. Here you see 2 young girls. This is that picture's from a few years ago. It's from the early 2000s, Lynx and Lamb Gade. And they were interviewed in October 2005, and the twins eagerly parroted the ideology of their mentors. And quote, "We're proud of being white. We want to keep being white," explained the 13-year-old Lynx. "We want our people to stay white. We don't want to just be, a big muddle. We just want to preserve our race." And so according to a 2004 interview with Vice magazine, Prussian Blue, which is the name of their music group, refers to their German heritage, the color of their eyes, which is a really pretty color, and Zyklon B, the preferred toxin used in Second World War concentration camps. Now, blue discoloration is caused by Zyklon B residue. According to the twins, The lack of substantial Prussian blue patches in the remains of the Nazi gas chambers might make people question some of the inaccuracies of the Holocaust myth. Now, since that time, they've grown up and they have left their white supremacist beliefs. For the most part, the only thing they still cling to is that they deny the Holocaust. Now, I think we have enough time to play. This is about a 4 or 5 minute video. It's also featured in our lessons. It's a short video featuring Brad Galloway, who is a former white supremacist and who gives us a clear understanding of why many young people end up becoming part of white supremacist groups. He also mentions how the youth are recruited. I think that this is also very important for us to understand so that we can more carefully be aware of what our youth, our children are encountering.
I was an ex-white power skinhead from the Canadian white supremacist movement. I spent about 15 years in the organized state movement camp. 15 years of my life were lost by involvement in this. It's going to be a journey to get it all back. Born and raised in Toronto. It was a fantastic childhood, going to summer camps and playing sports. I wasn't fitting in middle school. Well, there was a guy that I used to hang out with when I was 15 years old. I trusted him already. We had a gap of seeing each other for a few years until I was about 17 or 18. And I walked into a pub and he happened to be sitting there. He called me over and he said, have a seat. Let's have a beer. He had a shaved head and tight Levi's jeans with the Doc Marten boots on and jacket with a bunch of patches on it. He was explaining to me that he was part of this group of skinheads in Toronto. It's just a subculture, he was telling me. It's brotherhood. You can belong to this. It turned out that he was a member of the faction of white power skinheads. It was based on subculture music that had white power lyrics, like talking about, killing black, gassing Jews. The guy who recruited me, his most famous words were, just look around at society. Look at how it's killing the white race. I had a lot of questions at first, but really for me, it wasn't the ideology. It was more about belonging to it. That was the selling point for me, was simply that they were guys I could rely on. I didn't have friends, so kind of like push the ideology aside. We'd end up at these skinhead parties where 40, 50 people listening to those CDs, the Nazi salutes would start happening. So they're indoctrinating the new people that are coming around by having these parties and showing solidarity. And if we all hang out together, we drink together, we think the same things, and I could see what was happening. But once you're in it, it feels like almost you can't get out. I was passive. I got my buddies, they're my bros. It's funny the things you'll push aside to belong to something. So that's all that really mattered to me, was having a social group. We would get in a lot of different street fights with different street gangs. There was a Vietnamese gang that was around Queen Street. I chose to fight them one night. I got beat up pretty good. Blood was coming out of my head. I phoned another friend of mine, had a car. He brought me to Scarborough General Hospital. I got into this examination room and in walked this doctor. At this time I'm wearing a shirt that has a swastika on the front of it that says "No Remorse, Hail the Order," and boots and tight jeans, the whole skinhead outfit. And this doctor is a Jewish doctor. So I'm looking at him and he's looking at me. He comes and starts examining me. I would just remember, when is he going to leave? If I was him right now, I'm looking at this kid with a swastika shirt on. I would have walked out and said, there's got to be a different doctor that can stitch up this idiot's head. But he took his time to do his whole job that he had to do, stitch me up, and still had time to tell me, you got to thank your buddy here for bringing you. You were within a few hours of dying. Right? I'd lost so much blood. He effectively saved my life that night. It was the first time I considered leaving the group. The violence came to my door one day at my apartment. At the time, I only had one kid, but my wife was there too. She just said, now it's at our house. We had to move because of that incident. And we had moved, I think, 4 times because of different incidents or police pressure. And I believe if I didn't choose family, I may not be good at it. I could be dead. I could be in jail. That was the choice to leave. So I phoned up the guys and I turned in all my stuff, and that was it. We moved because of safety, security, family, and also to create a new community. I could never teach my child to hate. You lose so much of yourself by hating. And that's what I feel like I lost 15 years of time. The main risks or threats to youth are online today. those are the recruitment techniques for right-wing extremist groups, whether it be chat forums, whether it be Twitter, whether all social media. Just remember that that's not our society. There's a guy making a website, and he's an older guy probably, and he's trying to recruit youth and to indoctrinate these youth. It's dangerous, and those groups are violent and they're extreme, and you need to understand that before you go and try and, oh, you know, I just want to sign up and put my password in. Don't support these causes, because you're supporting organized hate groups and terrorists. They are spreading hatred, and they're using the internet to do it. Think about that for a second. Hate sucks all the positive life out of a person. Think about how hate affects the rest of the community. Think about how you being that person affects your neighbor or your friend that you used to have. Because when you join there, you lose all of that. All of your old life goes away. And this is, hate is your new life. You're volunteering yourself to be involved in violence. So you could likely be killed. More than likely, will end up in trouble with the police or in jail for a long period of time. It's a pathway to no future.
There are a number of things that we can learn from Brad Galloway there that I think is important for us as teachers and as parents. And some of that is, why would young people join and become parts of these groups? What are the and the recruiting techniques, or where the recruiting takes place? And so watching Brad Galloway is something that I've done a few times, and I always pick out something new from watching. We see various white nationalist groups here in Canada. In this picture, you might remember from a few years back, the Proud Boys in, I believe it was in Atlanta, Canada. And according to this 2017 article in the CBC, we have 100 active white supremacist groups here in Canada. And this is data provided through academic research, not just a survey done on the internet. And also, according to Stats Canada, young people under the age of 18 are the largest proportion of people who commit hate crimes motivated by religion, race, and sexual orientation. So these figures, according to Angela Wright, who writes, these figures directly contradict the assumption that many people have that certain type of hatred will die out with older generations. So that simply isn't true. Now, I've got, the article linked here, or sorry, the source included on this frame of where I've summarized. It's a fairly long article. It's not a full book, but there are many groups and many beliefs held by members of white nationalist groups, and they range from groups who want to move to a fully fascist style of government to those who want little to no government at all, which we might call anarchists. But here I've given a sampling of groups that we have in Canada. Most of these groups are also guilty of promoting anti-Semitism, either by directly targeting Jews, as we see in the KKK, or the neo-Nazi fascist group or fascist groups, or by denying Israel's right to exist. The 18-year-old arrested for murder 3 weeks ago in Buffalo posted a manifesto where he proclaimed his support of the "They Will Not Replace Us" movement. This movement claims that only descendants of white Europeans should inhabit North America, and that all other ethnic groups, including Jews, don't belong here and should be removed. And I know some of these group names you'll be familiar with. I want to go quickly to a website that we've linked on our Voices into Action website. We'll do a quick look. Basically, I think it's important that we as teachers and parents are aware of what we might see coming into our homes or into our classrooms. Now, on the ADL or Anti-Defamation League website, there are these resources, and you can see it over here, Hate Symbols Database. And on this database, they have listed all types of symbols that represent hate groups or white nationalist groups or alt-right groups. Some of them are, in tattoo form. Others we see used in social media. This one in particular, I see it quite regularly in social media. And I don't follow any alt-right or white supremacist groups whatsoever. I don't even go researching there, but I've seen this symbol used. And oh, by the way, if you click on these, like I just did there, it'll give you a greater explanation. And this one around somebody's name indicates that, oh, you're in the know. This person is referred to as Jewish, or here when used around a term or phrase such as banker, the intent is generally that the word Jewish be placed in front of the term or phrase. So there's a bit of explanation about each here when we go, but there are several. Oh, this one here, this hand gesture, sometimes is used as a greeting, or we've seen it identified on some news reports at times, which has the W for white and the P here for power. Codes. One code that if a couple of students meet, or a couple of kids meet, or a couple of people meet and just say 88, that stands for Heil Hitler, because H is the 8th letter of the alphabet. That one has been around for quite a period of time. It'll be in one of these pages of you can see there are 11 pages of symbols. I'm just randomly clicking. So if we start seeing, some of these symbols are very obvious, but others are not quite as bluntly obvious. Here's the SS hand sign. You can see that rune, lightning bolt here. Another hand sign that indicates, belonging to a particular supremacist group. As I said, some of them are codes. Some of them are very obvious copies of Nazi symbolism or of particular groups, like here are the Aryan Knights or Aryan Nations Tennessee Prison Gang. Anyway, you get the idea. And Bluten Air from the let's see, that was on Hitler Youth Knives, and it was their slogan in Hitler Youth. But as parents and teachers, I think it's important to recognize these symbols and codes when we see them, either on our children's notebooks or their doodlings, or new tattoos on their clothes, scrawled on their clothes, drawn on their clothes, or used as surreptitious greetings. I think it's important that we're vigilant to make sure that our children aren't pursuing a path that can lead to violence, as we heard from Brad Galloway. Now, there is good news. Conservative MP Kevin Waugh from here in Saskatoon has introduced a new private members bill in February of this year to amend the criminal code to prohibit public denial and distortion of the Holocaust. And it comes a week after NDP House Leader Peter Julian from BC tabled a bill to ban hate symbols, including swastikas and other Nazi symbols in Canada. So the government does pay attention. Unfortunately, in the last 2 years, we've seen COVID-19 become another means to target Jews with hate. Jews in Israel have been accused of creating COVID-19 and releasing it on the world after finding a cure or vaccination for it in order to make money off of the vaccination. Another accusation is that COVID-19 was developed in Israel along with the vaccine, so that the vaccine, well, I guess I've kind of highlighted that. The two main themes that we have seen associated with anti-Semitism arise from the world pandemic, this in addition to the dramatic increase in anti-Asian racism due to COVID-19. So responding, okay, and I'm getting close to wrapping up, Nancy, just so that you can stick to your timeline here. So combating anti-Semitism starts as we have today, and that's by learning about anti-Semitism, what it looks like. We need to know what it is before we can address it. So responding to incidents of anti-Semitism is complex for many reasons, not the least of which is where it is encountered or who you see or hear it from. Here on this frame, I have summarized some of the general points from a document that is linked in that QR code. It's from a handout entitled Anti-Semitism, 90 Ways You Can Respond. And I found this document very comprehensive, helping people address anti-Semitism at home, school, in the workplace, at your place of worship, in your community, and in your government. But it requires taking a stand. I've got at the bottom, become an upstander, not a bystander. In most anti-racism circles, bystanders are viewed as being complicit. Being an upstander, being somebody who either helps the victim by standing up for them or protecting them in some way, as part of that being an upstander, being that citizen that we want our children to become. So, but also how to take a stand is important. You know, it's important not to blame, shame, or insult a person that might have said something. We have to kind of come from a perspective of good intent and explain the impact rather than shaming and blaming. We might have to ask for a little bit more detail, what was meant, because the intent may not have been offensive, but the way it came out was offensive. And it might be just not having the knowledge. And we know that not necessarily all helping the person understand that the trait or characteristic may apply to a specific individual, but not necessarily to all people that are Jewish or to all people of a specific ethnic group. I've gone a little bit further into, from that document. Like I said, there's 90 ways listed on it. We need to educate ourselves about anti-Semitism, especially the new anti-Semitism, understanding the difference between criticizing Israel and the military actions is perfectly acceptable. That's democratic. But saying that Israel shouldn't exist or Jews shouldn't exist is anti-Semitic, and understanding that distinction. It's important to discuss at home and clarify what is and why all racism is destructive to society. Avoid using anti-Jewish language or stereotypes as we refer to others, particularly around our children. It's important to regularly review the news and discuss with our families stories about violence and protests to identify the role that anti-Semitism and racism plays in those events. And as I said, becoming an upstander, not a bystander, is an important thing to help our kids to understand. At our children's schools, I understand that your role as a parent is mainly during the time between 3:30 p.m. and 8:30 a.m., but there are ways that you can be involved in your children's classroom so as to be a part of the team. I always wanted the parents of my students to understand that we were a team working to help the kids to achieve their best and to become respectful, responsible, and knowledgeable citizens by the time they graduated. So these are some ways that you can help without being too obtrusive. I encourage teachers to hold discussions about all forms of prejudice and intolerance, or take time to show you support the teachers that do so already. Get personally involved in your children's schools by offering support in any form, like work with teachers to bring in guest speakers. Help with planning events such as one-day or half-day forums to address prejudice, anti-Semitism, racism. Share resources you might have found, such as good movies or documentaries or books. Is there more that we can do? Well, community involvement. Community organizations, most of our communities have associations where we can bring attention to intolerance, anti-Semitism, and racism, even if these are community associations. The executive is always looking for activities and ways to improve that local community. You could suggest events such as forums, education opportunities, forums on addressing the prejudice, anti-Semitism, and racism. Share these resources just like you might at the school. Share with community members. Set up local clubs to find ways to address intolerance and racism if they don't already exist. Now, signboards like this were installed in Quebec and Ontario in the 1930s. This xenophobia has not disappeared, as we have seen today. It has mutated. So if signs like this were created today, we would likely see more boards being added, including groups such as Muslims, Asians, and others. So we have work to do, and by taking part today, you've demonstrated your commitment to affecting change. So in conclusion, anti-Semitism is the world's oldest hatred and has mutated over the past 2,000 years. It continues to mutate, even including COVID-19. And as Rabbi Lloyd Sachs says, the hate that begins with Jews never ends with Jews. Anti-Semitism isn't about Jews, it's about non-Jews. And like I've said a few times, the most important first step to addressing any form of intolerance, hatred, and anti-Semitism is education. Today, we've begun that work on this important step. So, and finally, awareness is very important for both parents and teachers. We need to be vigilant and observant to ensure that we are in the best position possible to prevent serious incidents of hate. So I want to express a thank you for participating in tonight's session. I know it's a lot to take in, and there's so much information that I was trying to pare down for what I thought was a 2-hour session and is actually really a 1.5-hour session. I hope I haven't overwhelmed you, But if you have questions, please feel free to ask. If you want to further communicate with me regarding anti-Semitism and racism, please use the email address on the screen. This is my last event because I fully retired today, and I will still have access to this email address for a week or two as I wrap up my role with Voices into Action and Choose Your Voice. So I'm going to quit sharing my screen. So Nancy, we have a few minutes here for some questions. I quit sharing. I don't know if you had one or two questions that popped up during our presentation, but we've got a few minutes that we can hold to discuss any questions you might have.
Larry, thank you very much for that really informative presentation. I learned a lot, and I think probably that our participants did. So for those of you who are with us this evening, if you could put your question in the Q&A, and I will relate the question over. I'm sorry, because of the way the webinar is set up, this is how we have to do it. So I'll pass those on to Larry as they come in, and we can learn some more. Just waiting for them to come in.
Sure.
Thank you for sharing your last day of work with us.
Well,
really
I still have a few reports to send off to Dr. Chatterley, but yeah, that's for me. It's just after 6, so I still have time.
You still have time. You still have time. Well, thank you for spending it in Ontario. A question has come in and says, have you taken this presentation across Canada?
Yes, as a matter of fact, not the exact presentation, but a shorter version of it, a 45-minute version. I was part of the Liberation 75. You may have seen the logo on the PowerPoints. Liberation 75 that is centered out of Ontario, but it's Canada-wide. And so that was an opportunity to cover the history of anti-Semitism with grades 10 to 12 students. And we had about 450 students that took part in my session. There, I forget how many thousand students took part across Canada. So that in that way, yes. And our organization is Canada-wide. We connect to curricula in all of the provinces and territories, and not just anti-Semitism. We cover various areas. It started out as that, but we have just as much or just as many resources that focus on maybe Islamophobia or other genocides, gender issues. So.
And you do presentations in schools as well?
I did prior to COVID, but a few schools, but mainly to teacher groups. So I've attended teachers conferences. We used to have a representative in each of the regions of Canada. So for Toronto and Ontario, my former assistant director, before I took on the role, was from Toronto, and she gave presentations to teachers and to some schools in some classrooms. But mainly we work with teachers to help them to then tailor it to suit their classroom. Because our lessons might cover 2 or 3 hours rather than trying to pack it all into one presentation.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any other questions? I have a question. I was wondering if you wonder if the rise in anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Asian hate that we're seeing in Canada and around the world, what do you think? Do you have an idea of what is causing it, or is it the? Yeah, I do have an idea of why we're seeing a rise in it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the presentations that I've given over the last 2 years is on the increase in racism and hate, specifically due to COVID, and where we see people. Some of it is fear. There's fear of the unknown or fear of what we don't know about other people. Plus, at the same time, the gratification people get from hate it's absolutely astounding. If a person drills down and examines hate, and you heard Brad Galloway talk about how it sucks everything out of you, but when people immerse themselves in it, it's a strange or weird form of self-gratification to hate somebody or something. And, we elevate ourselves at the expense of someone else. We see that. I also, I've also had sessions on fake news, nothing new here, and how we've got this tendency to rely way more than we should on what we see in social media and the half truths. And I'm saying half, and then I think I'm being generous sometimes, the outright lies that we see sometimes in that are promoted by individuals on whatever platform that you may see. And we see all these algorithms in technology that, if a person does a search. So I'm doing a little bit of a search on and research for this presentation about anti-Semitic groups in Canada, let's say. Well, my computer picks that up and boom, then it continues to feed more and more and more of that stuff to me. And, I know how to, and as adults know how to stop and say, look, I know that's garbage, or I know why it's coming into my feed, but kids aren't necessarily that well versed yet at filtering. And so filtering through the media and finding reliable sources of information and understanding it's, I don't know if I've really answered your question, but
Well,
there's
you
more than
have.
one reason.
Yeah, you have. And there's a couple comments I want to read. I don't think personally, I don't think it's just children, although maybe they're more involved in all levels of social media than their parents are. But I know that I just, a very close friend of mine, I've seen her start to lean more towards what I would term conspiracy theory and just play nutty ideas. And through things that she's getting from relatives and
Yes.
and they're sharing the stuff that they've seen on social media. So and Ottawa probably proves that it can happen to anyone. There's two comments they're comments rather than questions. Sure. It says, I think we are seeing world leaders, Trump and others, who have created some allowance for hate and lots of lies and lack of integrity at the top.
Yes.
And then the other one is young people are being indoctrinated online, especially through gaming, very active anti-Semitic propaganda campaign online.
Absolutely.
I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
No, just to say absolutely right, and it was complicated by COVID, it created fear and it's found ways to divide us even more. Friends that get on opposite sides of wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, to be vaccinated, not to be vaccinated, and I've seen it within, I was with a group of retired teachers because that's kind of who I associate with now, but talking about what it's like in the community. I happen to teach in a town called Strasbourg. So when I mentioned that incident in Strasbourg, France, on my board, on my chalkboard, I saw a chalkboard in my classroom. I'd always put what happened of historical significance on each day. And on February 14th, that was the one I put up because it was our namesake. Again, pointing out the idea of racism and hate and being ill-informed, but the feelings of even some in areas of professional areas that are buying into stuff. Stuff is a 5-letter word for a 4-letter word in my vocabulary.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one. A comment that come in says, this is an excellent eye opener that I will share with my teenage son. Thank you for your commitment.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that comment. And that's my goal is to, that phrase that I used, responsible, respectful, involved citizens. That comes from the citizenship work I did. And that was kind of our goal. And that became kind of my mindset. We want our kids to be knowledgeable, responsible, and respectful.
Yes. I will ask if there are any more questions or comments. Put them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen or in chat. I'll take both. I'll just give it a minute because I've noticed it
Sure.
sometimes takes a second
It does
for
take a few seconds. That's right.
type and appear. Oh, a question. Oh, someone was, how many were on the Zoom call? I believe we got up to 20.
I think so. Mhm.
Someone says, thank you very much for this talk.
And I want to thank all of you for taking the time out of a beautiful evening, and beautiful. You're all in Toronto, I'm assuming,
Mhm.
and I have been to Toronto a few times, and there's so much to do there, and such a beautiful city. And I want to thank you for taking the time. But this is so important. As I said, it's not just anti-Semitism. It's anti-hate, anti-racism. It's across the board.
Yeah, and I appreciated that part of your talk about. I wrote down what Rabbi Sachs had said, that hate begins with the Jews, but it doesn't end with the Jews, and
Yes.
that we have to acknowledge that and
Mhm.
find ways to be an upstander, not a
Yes.
bystander.
Yeah.
So
And
I will add my. Oh, sorry. Go on.
no, I was just gonna say, and that statement that anti-Semitism is not about the Jews. It's about the non-Jews. It's the hatred that the non-Jews have for a people.
Yes.
And also, I can't remember if I think it's in the 19-minute version of Rabbi Sachs, where he talks about anti-Semitism is the canary in the mine, so to speak. It's that early warning. And I think he
Yeah.
brought that out at the very end of that little 5-minute clip, which is available on YouTube. That's something that I thought, we don't have time to watch a 19-minute speech. I didn't know what to pull out until I found that nice synopsis of it.
Yeah, that was very good. It's when it starts with bullying, it's not like how it was when we were growing up. Kids live online from morning until night. We need to control what our kids see as much as possible.
And that's so hard. I don't envy you. When I was a curriculum coach, I worked with media, not with media. I mean, worked as a curriculum coach for a school division. I used and promoted media smarts with our parents. If you're not familiar with it, it was to help parents and families negotiate through the path of media with their families. There are tools there for parents, tools there to help in schools. And the thing that I agree with you, bullying is so different. When I was bullied at school, I got on the bus, I had a 15-minute trip to get home. I got home and woohoo, I could be myself, do whatever I wanted, lived on a farm to start with, and then in a small town. But now this bullying follows you right into your innermost sanctum. And, children are bullied. I don't know if this is true, like hardcore fact, but to me, it feels like kids are bullied more in their own home and bedroom through
their phone.
social media. And that really breaks my heart. I have a grade nephew who's now 20, was bullied so bad in his grade 8 year, he couldn't finish school. He had to do homeschool, and he pretty much stopped talking for a year because of the impact. And he's now, these years later, starting to speak at a normal pace and work and act and interact at a normal pace. And devastating. Just devastating.
And it follows you long after the bullying may have ended.
That's right.
And when you say that, it makes me think, so I'll give a plug to any parents here who are sitting on their school councils, that I know a lot of school councils do workshops for parents on bullying, on social media, and that's really good. But I'm wondering if maybe they need to expand that into media literacy. And not just for kids, but for parents.
Yes.
And how we can, as parents, teach our kids and teach ourselves how to question. You were saying there's so many lies on social media, in the news, on news channels, how we can start to question the articles we might see, the things we might hear in the newspaper, and start to learn how to research things and learn
Yes.
how to find things. So that
Yes.
might, for those of you who are in school councils, that might be another direction to go into after talking about bullying and social media, talking about media literacy, both for your students and your parents.
Yeah, and there are online tools to help in schools, particularly help teachers with the students to give the students or the children the skills to assess what is coming across their screen. And I just don't remember the names of one that was part of my fake news, nothing new here series, where there were some tools available. I just don't remember the names of them right now because I wasn't thinking about that for today's session. So for those of you on school community councils, yeah, those kinds of tools, working with helping the kids. Oh, that's what I wanted to mention. One of the best sessions that I attended as a curriculum coach was in a school where the teacher had her grade 8 kids give a presentation to the parents about social media and the impact of social media. And these kids, they had to understand, like the teacher had to help them and help the parents understand that the presentation was not going to put the kids in a situation where their phones were going to be taken away. Because these kids were laying it out there, were being honest about what they encountered, the bullying that they encountered, how they felt targeted, why they wanted to be on social media as much as they were. And these kids kind of laid it out, put their hearts out there, and the parents responded in a very positive fashion. But it was really educational because these kids also talked to their parents about apps that could help parents to monitor the kids and help the kids, and apps that the kids could use. I can't remember the name, might be of one app, but it was an app that encouraged the kids to think twice before they shared a comment in whatever platform that they were using. But there are great things out there. It's finding them and making others aware of them in either lessons or apps or ideas for school community councils and so forth.
Yeah, that's a great idea. A comment's come in. We need to provide a safe space for our kids to talk.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
That's true. If there are no more questions, Larry, did you want to share the website for your organization or an email if people want to contact you?
Sure. You know what? I'm going to go back to share screen because my last frame is still there, if that's okay. And so my email address is at the bottom. You can see it here. And that email address I will still have active for a period of time. I'll have access to it. I'm going to do maybe the odd bit of it's not contract work, but I mean I'll still work some with this organization to help out where and when they want. And I will go to, I'm going to click to one other frame here to give, there we go. So there are the two programs if you're looking for where a lot of this is from. I took a lot of it from Voices into Action, which is geared to high school, but that's where I took the information from. But our Choose Your Voice has some videos also on it, but it's aimed at the grade 6 to 8 age group. And then this QR code here will take you directly to the Voices into Action website. So sorry for jumping around there back into the.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
It gives parents opportunity if they wish.
Another question has come in. What's the difference between snitching and upstanding?
Oh, so now, if the parent is asking about snitch, if that's a new term that they've heard, I don't know it. All right.
Well,
If you
I think, yeah, you're
snitching in
saying,
a
instead
conventional,
of be upstanding instead of a bystander.
yeah,
So,
so
yeah.
upstanding is not just, yeah. So I equate this to bullying. And bullying is, as a teacher, is absolutely the worst thing to have to deal with, because what you think you should do with a bully actually isn't always the best thing to do. So if I come across one student bullying another student and I discipline the bully, I'm gratified that I've done something. The student who was bullied for that moment, the victim, is gratified. But what have I really done? Most of the time, I've driven the bullying underground and probably given more reason for more bullying. The most effective strategies that, when I was taking training on it, indicated that if you can get the students to be those upstanders. Now, I'm not trying to cop out and just use that term. By that, I mean, to tell a bully, like, I had a couple of students that were terrific upstanders. It was just in them. I didn't train them whatsoever. I learned from them. This one girl would not take anything from anybody. Didn't mean she fought, but she just was not willing to take bullying, and she would not allow her classmates to be bullied. And she would kind of rally the other students, say, look, this isn't right. And bullies do it for the audience. Bullying seldom happens where there isn't an audience. They either record it and share it, or they do it in front of others because it demonstrates the inequity in power, and they build up their own egos and build up their own power, so to speak, by hurting the victim. And so if you take away that audience, or if the audience says, hey, no, this is wrong, knock it off, to the bully, and the bully has no support, no audience, that is more effective than me, the teacher, coming in and just proving I'm the bigger, better bully. Because really that's what the bully learns when a teacher or somebody in authority disciplines them and only disciplines them. It's hard to, it's a slow process to educate towards being an upstander. So that's kind of an upstander in a anti-bullying sense. An upstanding could be, just on the down low, so to speak, going and talking to an adult, whether it's a teacher or an EA, educational assistant is what we call them here, EAs, or teacher assistant, or to a parent. That's being an upstander. It doesn't mean you have to get in there and start knocking teeth out to defend somebody, because that generally just escalates rather than helps. But finding a way to communicate the inequity that is going on, and to find help for and that help might be a counselor that can go and talk to the counselor. Hey, you know what, my classmate is being harassed and being bullied. I think there needs to be a conversation between the counselor and that's at the very least, helping in that fashion.
I hope that answered the question. I'm
It's,
wondering if what the questioner meant was what you were saying at the end. If you go and tattletale on
Yes,
somebody, if you
yes.
snitch on someone,
Yes.
they're saying terrible things to that person. Are you being a snitch, or are you being an upstander? And
there's overlap there, isn't
kids
there?
have been, because kids have been told, we were told that when we were young, right? Be a
Exactly.
snitch.
Yeah.
So how do you encourage your children to stand up for the inequities they see around them, and not feel like they're being a snitch, or on the other hand, like not feeling that they might get in trouble or be unsafe themselves?
That's right. Yes, exactly.
So it's a tough one. So we're at 8:30 in 3 minutes. And if we have no more questions, I see that some people are leaving the room.
Yep,
So
and
I'm going to assume
good
that
for people. We're sticking it
get
out.
the kids to bedtime
Yes.
So I want to thank all of you for being here this
thank you.
evening. It was really wonderful for you to join us on the Parent and Community Engagement's Office last conversation series. And Larry, I want to thank you very, very much
You're welcome.
for joining us on your last working day, all the way from Saskatchewan, and helping us to understand better anti-Semitism, its history, it's the way it's being, it's raising its head again,
Mhm.
and also hate in all its forms.
In all its forms,
For
exactly.
all people that make up our country and the world. So thank you very, very much for,
Yeah, thank
for
you,
being here.
Nancy. Yep.
And thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. This will be available on the Parent and Community Engagement YouTube channel.
Great, great. I'm glad it's available for others. Thanks very much, Nancy. It's been a pleasure working with Toronto District School Board and your branch of it. Thank you for undertaking this really, really important work. It's important everywhere, not just in Toronto.
Yeah, everywhere, especially now.
Well,
Thank
good night,
you.
everybody. Thank you again.
Good night.